going to talk for not very long. I am going to try and persuade you of two things. The first thing that I'm going to try to persuade you of is that the problem that is under discussion here in terms of working class participation in the arts is one of a really significant scale. The second is that it is something that is really significantly deep-rooted. I think the reason why we're all here, certainly the reason that I'm here, is because I love it and I want it to thrive, to survive and thrive. But in order for things to survive and thrive, we need to really directly confront the scale of the problem and how deep-rooted it is. So in terms of giving a bit of an overview who I am, why am I here, why am I talking about this, my name is Mark. My day job is that I work at university, and I've written a couple of things that have partly come up already, which might be relevant. I've written a book jointly with colleagues Orion Brooke, who works at the University of Edinburgh, and David Bryan, who works at the University of Manchester, called Culture is Bad for You, Inequality in the Cultural and Creative Industries. Very reasonably priced, even more reasonably priced if you listen to it on the streaming services for nothing. But also, as has been mentioned, I have also written a report for the Sutton Trust called The Class Act, mapping out some of these inequalities, particularly with a focus on higher education. In addition to working with Dave Norian on that, that's also with Erica Holt-White from the Sutton Trust. As I understand it, the Sutton Trust is doing loads of great activity during the various conference events and fringes, which I would really encourage people to engage with if you can. So, by way of background, maybe the number that has caught on fire the most in the last couple of years is that about 8 or 9% of people working in film and television occupations are from working class backgrounds. And so you end up, which is disastrously low. That is nowhere near the number of people working in jobs in general who are from similar backgrounds. But I want to reframe things away from a story of working class exclusion into a story of middle class dominance. Creative occupations are dominated by middle class people. There are lots of means through which middle class people are able to leverage their let's think about social capital, economic capital, lots of other relevant things in order to make this persist. And so there's a couple of examples of this. About 2/3 of people working in film and TV occupations are from middle class backgrounds. And so that's the first sort of number that really catches on. The second number that really catches on is that the percentage of working class people working in these occupations, creative occupations, roughly halved between the 1970s through to the 2010s. And that sounds catastrophic, but actually something slightly different is going on. In general, the workforce, the economy has shifted. The number of people in general who are, say, my age compared to my parents' age, who are from middle class backgrounds, that number has gone up a lot, which sounds promising and it isn't. What it actually reflects is that the inequalities in creative work have been roughly persistent through this entire period. There's a danger in thinking we just need to go back to what things were like in the 70s and the 80s and then everything will be okay. Actually, these are structural problems which need structural solutions. But for the rest of my time here, I'm going to primarily talk about higher education. We've heard from Baz in quite a lot of detail, which is really great to hear, about the situation from early years through to when people are about 18. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens in higher education. It's worth reinforcing always that higher education isn't just something that you do when you're 18 or 19. So just keep that in mind. The numbers that I'm going to be talking about here are reflective of the very diverse communities and cohorts that engage in higher education. I'm going to particularly talk about first degrees. So creative higher education, which I'm defining as things like studying music or drama or art, but also things like design, fashion, games, media production, and so on, has a larger percentage of young people who are from what I'm basically going to refer to as middle class backgrounds than the rest of higher education. There are some really extreme examples of this. In the Oxbridge universities, in King's, in Bath University, more than half of the people studying these creative subjects are from what we call NSEC 1 occupations. These are occupations that include things like lawyers, doctors, my job, chief execs, that sort of thing. I said I didn't want to tell a story about working class exclusion versus middle class dominance, but I think it is worth reinforcing that at Oxbridge, the percentage of working class kids on young people on these programs is about 4 or 5%. The really shocking one is Manchester, where the number is 7%, compared with the rest of the university where it's 19. This isn't just a story about higher education, this is a story about some of the distinctiveness of creative higher education. Not just a story of universities as well, not everybody who does higher education goes to a university. At places like the Royal College of Music and the Royal Academy of Music, more than half of the students who go to these institutions had been privately educated. But we shouldn't think of creative higher education and of creative lives as being just a monolith. There's a lot of variation within this. So one comparison that I would give you is that 11% of people who study music at university in higher education, that includes places like conservatoires, are privately educated. For students studying game design, that number is 2. Games and TV are the biggest cultural forces in the country. It is really important to not just think about classical music, theatre, visual arts as sites for cultural activity. We have one of the best games industries in the world. And in spaces like this, I think that's really worth reinforcing. It's also worth reinforcing that I've talked primarily here about social class, but looking at subjects like art, drama, and music are also sites of major exclusion of ethnic minorities across the board, whether we're talking about within the middle class students that are studying those subjects or otherwise. And then what? About 70% of people who are working in creative occupations have degrees. That number, interestingly, and maybe counterintuitively, is lower for white men from middle class backgrounds. Because if you're a white man from a middle class background, there are other routes in. If you're not, then you are pretty much reliant on the sort of guardrails, but also the credentials and training that higher education offers. So I'm always a bit nervous about trying to come up with routes to transforming cultural work that don't involve thinking about higher education, because if we are honest, these are the routes through which people end up in these occupations. We know how hiring works. It's important to work with the infrastructure that we have. So I'm going to make a couple of suggestions. Like I say, these are major problems with deep roots, but equally, we shouldn't be fatalistic about this. It's worth acknowledging the great work that is already happening, providing support to people that are doing great work. Always want to give a shout out to Arts Emergency, who are a charity that I've done quite a lot with, supporting young people from diverse backgrounds, getting access to arts and culture. The EBAC has been a disaster. Baz has already talked about this, so I won't go into a lot more detail, but if you disincentivise schools from getting young people to study the arts, fewer young people are going to study the arts. Unpaid internships are a disaster. If you work in an arts organisation and you have an unpaid intern, stop right now. There has been some really great work happening within Parliament on this. People might be familiar with the All-Party Parliamentary Group on creative diversity, which is not currently active due to some of the things that happen with APPGs. But they have published 2 reports with the language of creative majority, which highlights really excellent practice. Yesterday, there was an announcement at Labour conference about the return of maintenance grants. And this is brilliant news. In general, I have only positive things to say about maintenance grants. It is not currently clear which subjects are going to be eligible for maintenance grants. The language of maintenance grants was around the industrial strategy, and creative industries are a priority sector within the industrial strategy. Everyone in this room should be lobbying for creative subjects to be included in terms of maintenance grants. And then the last thing that I would say is it's very easy to kick the BBC. I'm sure everyone here has done it. But the BBC is one of relatively few organisations that is actually collecting class data on its own workforces. We should congratulate them for that rather than just kicking them for the fact that their numbers are bad, because at least they know what their numbers are. I will wrap up there. Thanks very much.